depths of a forgotten moon, a lone scavenger named Rook stumbles upon a girl lying in the wreckage of a fallen ship. She's not human. Her silver blue hair and glowing necklace tell a story of power and danger. As Rook rescues her, he learns she's no ordinary fugitive. She carries the galaxy's most coveted secret, the crown, an ancient relic with the power to reshape empires. But the galaxy's most feared enforcers, the Inquisitors, are hunting her down, and Rook is caught between the past he's tried to escape and a future he never wanted. With every second counting down, Rook must decide. Will he turn her in for the bounty or fight for the freedom that could change everything? The battle for survival has just begun. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. On the outskirts of the galaxy, far from the bustling cities and bright stars, there existed a forgotten moon named Elistar 7. It was a cold, desolate rock, far from the paths of trade routes and the eyes of the Empire. No one really came here, and that was just how Rook Carver liked it. Rook was a scavenger, a man who made a living picking through the wreckage of starships that had fallen to the moon's surface. His days were simple, quiet, and empty, just the way he preferred them. He wasn't a hero. He didn't want to be one. In fact, Rook didn't even think of himself as much of anything. The war had been over for years, but the scars of humanity's losses still lingered in his heart. He had seen too much destruction, too much death. His hands were stained with it. Now all he wanted was silence. Silence from the chaos of the universe. Silence from the battles that had consumed his past. And most of all, silence from the pain of the memories that clung to him. The quiet of Elistar 7 suited Rook just fine. The moon was scattered with the wreckage of countless ships, a graveyard of metal bodies abandoned in the void. Some were human, others alien, yet all were forgotten. It was the perfect place for a man who wanted to forget, for a man who had no future. Here on the dusty surface, Rook could sift through the ruins, salvaging whatever scraps were left behind. Broken engines, cracked power cells, and rusted plating. All things that had once been part of something grand, now reduced to nothing, more than a chance to make a few credits. But today, as Rook walked through the wreckage, something felt different. His scanner beeped, a small, quick sound that made his heart skip. It wasn't the usual chirp indicating a part to be scavenged. No, this was something else. Something deeper. Rook squinted at the screen. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a beacon. It was something else. His curiosity piqued. He began moving towards the source of the signal, walking through the debris with practiced ease. The wind was still. The sky was a dull gray, and the silence of the moon pressed in on him like a heavy blanket. The wreckage he approached was different from the others. This ship was large, almost too large for the moon to support. It had crashed hard. Deep grooves scarred the dirt, and the ship's hull was torn open like a can, its innards spilling out onto the rocky ground. The smoke still curled from the broken engines, a faint glow in the distance. It was fresh. Rook knelt down, his boots crunching the gravel beneath him as he approached the wreckage. This wasn't just any ship. It was a fallen cruiser. A ship that belonged to a species he didn't recognize. He began to sift through the debris, his hands pulling at twisted metal and broken wiring. But then he saw something. A glint of light, faint and strange. He stepped closer, and there she was. She lay between twisted beams of metal, half buried in ash and electrical wires. Her small frame was barely visible, but it was enough to catch Rook's attention. Her skin was pale, too pale for a human, and her hair was silver blue, unlike anything Rook had ever seen. She wasn't human. She wasn't like the Zerani soldiers he had seen during the war either. She was something else. Her armor was tattered, scorched from the crash, and the strange necklace she wore glowed faintly in the dim light. Rook almost walked away. It wasn't his problem. But then she moved. The smallest motion, just a twitch of her fingers, and Rook froze. His eyes widened, and he dropped the pack he had been carrying. His heart raced, and without thinking, he rushed to her side. She was alive. Barely. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling from shock. Rook checked her pulse, his fingers brushing against her cold skin. She was alive, but barely. He glanced over his shoulder. No ships nearby. No life signs except for hers. She was alone. In a way, so was he. Without another thought, Rook lifted her gently into his arms, cradling her against him as he made his way back to his base camp. A small cave tucked away from the prying eyes of the galaxy. It wasn't much. Just a place to store his tools and supplies, a place to stay out of sight. He laid her down carefully on the makeshift bed he had made out of old materials and patched up her wounds as best as he could. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. Who was she? What was she doing here? And why had he, a simple scavenger, found her? He didn't know the answers, but he couldn't leave her behind. He didn't know why, but he couldn't. Rook powered up the old medical pod he had scavenged years ago. It hummed to life and the machine began scanning her body, stabilizing her vitals. The readings were mostly alien, the language of the machine, foreign to him. But he knew enough to see that she wasn't just some stranded passenger. No, she was important, more important than anyone who had ever crossed his path. As the machine worked, Rook sat by her side, watching the pod's screen, his mind swirling with questions. Who was she? Why had she crashed here? And most importantly, what was the galaxy going to do about her? He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He didn't know it yet, but the quiet life he had been living on Elistar 7 was about to be shattered, and it all started with a girl in the wreckage. Rook had never been one for company. He had spent years alone, working in the silence of Elistar 7, keeping to himself. But as he watched the girl, who was now resting in the small medical pod, something about her unsettled him. She was alive, but barely. And though she looked fragile, there was a strange power about her that Rook couldn't shake. Every time he glanced at her, his mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why had she crashed here? And more disturbingly, why had he chosen to help her? The cave where Rook kept his hideout was small and dimly lit, the only light coming from the faint glow of the pod's control panel. The girl lay motionless, her breathing shallow, but at least it was steady now. Rook couldn't help but wonder if she would wake up to a world that had already decided her fate. The galaxy, after all, had a way of making decisions for people, like her, decisions that often ended in death. As the hours passed, Rook found himself checking on her more frequently. He'd never been good at waiting. But this was different. He wasn't just waiting for a machine to finish its work. He was waiting for something he couldn't quite explain. He was waiting for answers. That evening, as the pod's hum filled the air, the girl finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered and she groggily opened her eyes. Her silver blue gaze met his, and for a moment, Rook forgot to breathe. She didn't speak at first, just watched him with a look that said she knew something he didn't. Where am I? Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Rook sat up straighter, unsure of what to say. You're safe for now, he said, keeping his tone steady, though his heart raced. You're on Elistar 7, a quiet place. She blinked a few times, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Elistar 7? She repeated, her voice strained as she tried to sit up. What happened to me? Rook hesitated. He didn't want to go into the details of her crash. She had enough to deal with. You crashed, he said simply. You were lucky to survive. There was a long silence as the girl seemed to take in the surroundings, her gaze sweeping across the dim cave. Her fingers moved to her chest, to the glowing necklace that still pulsed faintly. I didn't ask for this, she murmured, her voice tinged with sadness and fear. Rook furrowed his brow, wondering what she meant. Before he could ask, she continued, her voice growing stronger. The crown chose me, I didn't want it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with an unspoken weight. Rook stared at her, unable to comprehend what she had just said. The crown? He repeated, his voice low, almost to himself. She nodded slowly, her eyes unfocused as if she was seeing something beyond the walls of the cave. It's not just a necklace. It's a living thing. It's alive. And it chose me. Rook's mind raced. He had heard rumors about the crown, whispers among soldiers and scavengers, stories about a powerful ancient artifact said to hold the collective intelligence of an entire empire's rulers. It was more than just a symbol of power. It was the throne itself, bound to one person every few centuries. But he had never truly believed the stories. They were too wild, too far-fetched. Yet here she was, claiming it had chosen her. But they said you murdered your family, Rook said carefully, almost afraid to ask. He didn't know why he had to say it, but the words slipped out before he could stop them. That you stole the crown. She flinched at the mention of her family, her eyes flickering with pain. No, she whispered, her voice breaking. I didn't kill them. The council did. I was the only one who survived. They came for me, and they killed them all. Her voice trembled as she looked down at her hands as if the memories were too much to bear. I ran, but they found me. And then the crown. It found me too. Rook felt a chill run down his spine as the weight of her words sank in. The galaxy was full of rulers and empires who controlled everything with their power, but there were always those who slipped through the cracks, those who weren't as easily controlled. And it seemed that this girl, with her strange, glowing necklace, was one of them. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Rook asked, his voice soft, trying to understand. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. Because I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want to be the next target. The crown is dangerous, and so am I. But I don't want to be a part of it. Not anymore. She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the sides of the medical pod. The council. They will stop at nothing to take the crown back. They won't let me go. Rook stared at her, unsure of what to say. He didn't want to be involved in anything bigger than himself. But now, it seemed like there was no way out. Suddenly, the quiet of the cave was shattered by a harsh beeping sound coming from the scanner. Rook's heart skipped a beat as he looked at the console, his eyes widening in alarm. Ships, he muttered under his breath. They're coming. He grabbed his pack, his pulse quickening. They'll find us. We have to move. The girl's eyes widened in fear. They're already here, aren't they? Rook didn't answer. He knew she was right. The Empire's inquisitors, the most feared enforcers of the Veyran Council, would stop at nothing to track her down. And now it seemed like he had become part of their hunt. Rook grabbed the girl's arm gently, helping her to her feet. We're not safe here, he said, his voice urgent. But we don't have much time. We need to go now. As they hurried through the narrow tunnels of the cave, Rook's mind raced. He didn't know what he was getting into, but he knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. The girl with the crown, the fugitive he had rescued, had just become his problem. And he had no idea how deep the galaxy's secrets went, or how far he would have to go to protect her. Rook's heart pounded in his chest as the distant sound of the ships grew louder, their engines cutting through the stillness of Alistar 7. It was impossible to ignore the hum of their advanced technology, a reminder that he and Mira were no longer alone. The moment she had spoken of the crown, everything had changed. Rook wasn't just hiding from a few wandering bounty hunters. Now he was running from the full might of the Veyran Empire. They're not just bounty hunters, Rook muttered to himself, his hand tightening around his rifle. They're inquisitors. Mira, still weak from her crash and the shock of her near-death experience, glanced at him, her eyes wide with fear. They're here for me, aren't they? Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from the trauma she had endured. Rook didn't need to answer. They both knew the truth. The Inquisitors, the galaxy's ruthless enforcers, were the last ones they wanted to face. They didn't capture prisoners, they erased them. We need to move, Rook said, his voice firm, though his mind was racing. He didn't know how much longer they had, but it wouldn't be long before the Inquisitors found them. They were experts at tracking. The moment the ships landed, they'd be on the ground, sweeping the wreckage, searching for any trace of Mira. Rook helped Mira to her feet, guiding her through the narrow cave corridors. The walls were rough, jagged stone that seemed to close in around them with each step. The sound of boots crunching gravel above them echoed in the silence, reminding Rook just how close they were to being discovered. He stopped at a small junction, his hand pressed against the cool stone as he strained to listen. The ships had landed, their engines now quiet, but Rook could hear the voices of the Inquisitors above him, their harsh tones piercing through the walls. "They're getting closer," Rook said, his voice low. "We can't stay here." Mira nodded, her grip on Rook's arm tightening as if she was afraid she would collapse. "Where do we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I know a place," Rook replied. "But we need to move fast." They continued through the tunnels, each step becoming more urgent as the sounds above grew louder. Rook's mind was racing. Where could they go? The Inquisitors were known for their stealth technology and precise tactics. They wouldn't just sweep the surface and leave. They would search every corner of this moon if they had to. And once they found Rook and Mira, there would be no escape. As they reached the entrance to the cave, Rook stopped. Outside, the light was dim, the air thick with dust. The surface of Elistar 7 looked like a graveyard, silent, desolate, and lifeless. But it was their only hope. There was a hidden shelter, a place Rook had built in the event of an emergency, a place where no one would think to look. But getting there was another matter entirely. Rook's heart skipped a beat as he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps above them. They were getting closer. He turned to Mira, his eyes scanning her face. She looked exhausted, her silver blue hair tangled and wild. But there was a fire in her eyes that Rook couldn't ignore. She wasn't just some helpless girl anymore. The crown had bonded with her, and she was carrying the weight of an entire empire's legacy. Rook had no idea what that meant, but he knew one thing for sure. They had to get out of there. "This way," Rook whispered, motioning for her to follow him. They moved quickly, dodging behind boulders and taking cover where they could. Rook's senses were heightened, his body tense with every sound that came from the shadows. The Inquisitors were close. Too close. As they neared the shelter, Rook could hear the Inquisitors speaking in their harsh, guttural language. Their voices echoed through the moon's empty landscape, sending chills down Rook's spine. They were right above him. He could see their shadows moving against the dust as they scoured the wreckage. The fear in Mira's eyes was palpable, but Rook couldn't afford to show his own. Not now. Not when everything depended on them making it to the shelter. "Stay low," Rook hissed, grabbing Mira's arm as they crouched behind a rock. He motioned for her to remain silent as he peered around the corner. He could see them now, 3 Inquisitors, each wearing sleek black armor that blended into the darkness. Their glowing visors scanned the wreckage, their movements precise and methodical. Rook's pulse raced. He knew they had no time. If they stayed here too long, the Inquisitors would find them. And if they found them, it would be over. He glanced back at Mira, her face pale but determined. She was ready. She knew what was at stake. "On my signal, we move," Rook said, his voice barely audible. He steadied his breath, waiting for the perfect moment. The Inquisitors were moving closer, and Rook knew that if they didn't act now, they would be trapped. With a deep breath, Rook stood and sprinted toward the shelter, pulling Mira along with him. The Inquisitors spotted them immediately. A voice shouted in a language Rook didn't understand, but he didn't need to hear the words to know what was coming. The chase was on. Mira stumbled, her legs shaky, but Rook kept her moving. They had to reach the shelter. They had to reach safety. The Inquisitors fired, their shots narrowly missing them as Rook and Mira ducked behind rocks, their hearts pounding in their chests. Rook's mind was sharp, calculating each move. There was no time to hesitate. He reached the shelter's entrance and shoved the door open. "Get inside," he shouted to Mira. She hesitated for just a second, but then she ran in, disappearing behind the heavy door. Rook followed, slamming it shut just as the Inquisitors reached the entrance. They had made it inside, but Rook knew this was only the beginning. The Inquisitors would not stop. They would not give up until they had found Mira. But for now, they were safe. Rook exhaled, his back pressed against the cool walls of the shelter. He looked at Mira, his heart still racing. They had survived, but the war was far from over. And the galaxy, for all its vastness, was about to feel the ripple effects of the Crown's awakening. The shelter's walls were thick and cold, but Rook could still feel the heat of their pursuit burning through the silence. The Inquisitors were not far behind. He could hear them, their footsteps heavy against the surface of Elistar 7, methodical and precise. They would stop at nothing to capture Mira. She was the Crown's chosen one, and that made her a target that could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Rook's mind raced. They had no time to waste. Mira was still shaken from their flight across the surface, but there was a fire in her eyes now, one that hadn't been there before. The Crown had bonded with her, but it was clear that it wasn't just the Crown that had power. It was Mira herself. She wasn't just a fugitive. She was a force that could reshape the galaxy. "We can't keep running," Rook said, breaking the silence that hung between them. Mira looked up at him, her face pale but determined. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rook didn't have an answer. Not at first, but the longer he stared at her, the more he realized that the only way out of this, out of the mess they had found themselves in, was to fight back. "We fight," Rook said, his voice firm with resolve. "We don't run anymore, we stand, we face them." Mira blinked, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You want to fight the Inquisitors? You've seen what they can do." Rook nodded. He had seen what they could do. He had seen the destruction they left in their wake. But he had also seen something in Mira, something he hadn't expected. She wasn't just a girl in danger anymore. She had become something more, something powerful. And that power wasn't just inside her because of the Crown. It was something deep inside her, something that reminded Rook of what it meant to be human. "I've seen enough," Rook said, taking a step toward her. "I've seen enough people crushed by fear, by power, but humanity. We don't bow to anyone, we rise." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Mira didn't speak right away. Instead, she looked down at her glowing necklace, the crown, as if contemplating its power, its potential. "The Crown wasn't supposed to choose me," she said softly, her voice filled with sorrow. "It was supposed to choose a ruler, someone who could control the Empire, not someone like me." Rook stepped closer, his hand on her shoulder. "Maybe it didn't choose you to control. Maybe it chose you to change things, to make things better, to show the galaxy what true power is." Mira looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for the truth in his words. There was fear in her gaze, but there was also a spark, something that Rook hadn't seen before. It wasn't just the power of the Crown that had chosen her. It was the strength of her heart, the power of her humanity. "But we can't change the galaxy alone," she said quietly. "We need more than just us." Rook nodded. "We don't have to do it alone. We'll gather allies. We'll show them what humanity stands for. We'll show them that we're not afraid." Just then, the sound of boots outside the shelter broke their moment of silence. Rook's heart skipped a beat. The Inquisitors were close. They were here, and there was nowhere to run. Rook grabbed his rifle, checking the charge. He looked at Mira one last time. "Are you ready?" he asked. Mira nodded, her eyes now filled with a new determination. "I'm ready." The door to the shelter suddenly exploded inwards, the sound deafening as the Inquisitors stormed in. Their black armor gleamed in the dim light, their glowing visors scanning the room with deadly precision. There were 3 of them, as Rook had expected. Their weapons were drawn, aimed at Rook and Mira. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They knew what they were there to do. "You're out of time," one of the Inquisitors said, his voice cold and emotionless. "Surrender the fugitive and you may yet live." Rook didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, positioning himself between Mira and the Inquisitors. "We're not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady. "This ends now." The Inquisitors didn't hesitate. They raised their weapons, their fingers tightening on the triggers, but before they could fire, Mira stepped forward. Her necklace pulsed with light, a bright, powerful energy that seemed to fill the room. Rook felt the ground beneath him tremble as the crown's power surged through the air. The Inquisitors faltered, their weapons shaking in their hands. "Enough," Mira said, her voice calm but filled with authority. The Inquisitors froze, their eyes wide with shock. The crown's power was alive now, and it wasn't just controlling her, it was amplifying her. "You can't do this," one of the Inquisitors muttered, his voice quivering. "The crown belongs to the Council. The crown belongs to no one," Mira replied, her voice firm. "It has chosen me, and it has chosen humanity. It's time for the galaxy to see that." With a sudden burst of energy, Mira raised her hand, and the Inquisitors were thrown back, their weapons knocked from their hands. The force of the crown's power was overwhelming, a shockwave that sent them crashing to the ground. They scrambled to regain their footing, but it was too late. Rook stood beside her, his rifle still at the ready, but he didn't need it. Mira was more than capable now. The power of the crown was undeniable, but it wasn't just the crown's energy that had changed everything. It was the strength of her will, the fire in her heart that had ignited the galaxy's forgotten hope. "This is just the beginning," Rook said, his voice filled with a new sense of purpose. "The galaxy will know that humanity doesn't bow to anyone." As the Inquisitors lay defeated at their feet, Mira turned to Rook, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. "We've won this battle, but the war is far from over." Rook nodded, his heart filled with a new kind of hope. "Together," he said, "we'll make sure the galaxy knows that." The shelter was quiet once more, but this time it wasn't filled with the tension of fear. It was filled with the power of defiance, the power of humanity standing strong against a galaxy that had forgotten its worth. And for the first time in a long time, Rook knew that the future wasn't as bleak as it once seemed.